Good afternoon. Well, let's start this week, September 26th through October 2nd. The topic is Purpose of Criminal Punishment. I hope you enjoy the chapter 5, because I think it's one of the better chapters in the book, and it'll give you a base to work from in further chapters, further papers. Even though this week there's just a test, look through this chapter, and some of the terms in there is something you might want to look into with your literature review, with your literature summaries. So some of the bigger topics in that chapter on restorative justice, the writings of Michel Foucault, just some of the ideas in the book might be something in general you want to look at and discuss later. I want to start by reading you something that was given to me by a court clerk in probably 1997, 98. And she was moving records from one building to another, really like what we're doing now, changing courthouses. And that's why I found this week. I was changing one of my old offices, closing it out, moving into our new building. And I found this old yellowed folder, opened it up, and lo and behold, it had this information in it which I wanted to save. So it's moved to my next office. Hopefully I'm going to be moving this into a digital form, because this paper is old and yellow. It's been around quite a while, like I have, but it's pretty important material. And this was she was moving a book, and these sheets fell out, and as she picked them up, she noticed it was a juvenile case. And so she copied it before she moved the book, and gave me a copy of what was written. So here, let me read this to you. Now on this day, April 30th, 1918, comes Russell Dearmont, probation officer of the Juvenile Division of this court, within and for the county of Cape Girardeau in the state of Missouri, and files a complaint against one Alvin Arnold M. I won't give out the total name here. We'll just say M, a habitual delinquent colored child residing in the city of Cape Girardeau, Missouri. And on May 1st, 1918, this cause is taken up and submitted to the court, and the court finds that Alvin Arnold M. is a habitual delinquent child of the age of 11 years, in parentheses, colored, comma, that he throws rocks through windows, takes money from other children by force and violence, that he rifles the pockets of cloaks in schoolrooms, steals and carries away money belonging to his father, grabs and carries away money belonging to the ticket salesman in moving picture shows. It is therefore sentenced, ordered, and adjudged by the court that the said Alvin Arnold M., colored minor child of the age of 11 years, be confined in the Missouri Reformatory located at Boonville, Missouri, for a period of 6 years from the first day of May, 1918, and that the sheriff of this county shall, without delay, remove and safely convey said Alvin Arnold M. to said reformatory, there to be kept, confined, and treated in the manner directed by law governing said institution, or until he be otherwise discharged in due course of law. Signed by the judge and by the clerk. Well, after I received that, first pretty astounded at the severity of the punishment, considering those are all misdemeanor offenses and things we would have handled as an informal adjustment and wouldn't have even made it to the juvenile judge in our circuit nowadays. But 6 years sentence is pretty incredible for a juvenile defendant. And so I did a little more digging, and I had the Secretary of State back then. Very few records were digitized, so a research clerk, had to dig this up. But I found a page from the book. It's called the Boys Commitment Book, number 13, Missouri Training School. And so I located some more records on this young man in the hopes of returning some of this material to his family, which I was never able in 1999-2000 to find a family member. Since then, I think it might be more likely that we can find somebody through Ancestry or find a grave or something like that, locate some members of his family. So as my life slows down, I hope to work on this further, on this person's family. But let me tell you what I found in this boy's commitment book. It's a record, an entry record of when a child or when a juvenile comes into Boonville or any of the training schools. A record is written about them, and hopefully one's written when they're discharged, but I don't have that copy yet. But what the record says follows the order that he was admitted on May 3rd, so it took them from May 1st to May 3rd, well actually April 30th to May 3rd to get him transferred to the training school. So in that time frame, he would have stayed in the county jail with adults, because there was no such thing as a juvenile home at that time, or detention center, or anything like that. So this boy would have stayed in the adult jail. It's interesting that I'm sure he's standing there with a deputy when he enters the training school, and so asked for his birth date. He didn't know his birth date, so there's a don't know written down. Age, he has his age here at 9. So the training school entered him as 9 years old. The court record says 11. The little boy said 9. More than likely he was 9. I would think he would at least have that age. In the descriptions, it describes him as height 4 foot 2 1/4 inches, weight 60 pounds, hair black, eyes brown, build medium, complexion black, marks and scars, long scar in right eyebrow. I thought it's interesting that this record goes by complexion, and there's no mention of race in this record. As far as parents, it describes an address for the father. I've probably been in this home, 328 South Street in Cape Girardeau. But with mother and father's name, it just gives a first name. So there's no real push for records here. Also on the 9-year-old, it says his schooling is through the 2nd grade. So that would be about right, being 9 years old. The next person on the list, he was number 6820. The next person, 6821, Leroy Johnson, was from Iron County, listed on this sheet. And this seems more of the type of client that I would have thought at Boonville, not 9-year-olds. But this guy was 15. Both parents were dead, listed as dead in this list. It's from Iron County. Date of sentence, May 2nd. So he came in, it's interesting, came in a day before Arnold did. Oh, date of sentence, May 2nd, not the entry date. May 3rd, same date as Arnold when he entered. But his crime is grand larceny, so it's a theft, a felony theft called, at that time, grand larceny. So it could have been with a weapon, without, could have been a robbery, but some major felony stealing. Has him down at 5 foot 6 1/4 inches, 15 years of age. He knows his birth date. 125 pounds, color hair black, color eyes brown, build medium, complexion mulatto. So again, marks and scars none. So again, all of these sheets, it's very interesting. They're not giving race, they're just going by complexion, which would be a study in itself, I'm sure. So that is an old one that I intend on looking into further. Tried years ago to locate family locally through church records. The family basically disappears from Cape Girardeau. So the old church records, the old cemeteries here had no records of this young man or his parents. But I'm not going to give up. I'm going to still look further for information about this young man. What happened to him? Did he end up serving in World War II? Did he die at Boonville? Where is his family now? Did anything turn out successful after that type of initial sentence? Just basically because he wore the juvenile out or wore the community out. Happens quite frequently that kids will do a lot of small things and wear the system out to the point that they throw up their hands and do a big sentence. So I think that part of it's real interesting. In this room this week, we have a young man who's being held in Kentucky right now on a weapons violation and a possession of heroin charge. And he should be back this week to be transferred to adult court for a murder case that came about a couple weeks ago. And I will, when the probable cause statement comes out to the public, I'll publish that on our module so you can read it. It's open document for the public, so it's nothing confidential. It'll be in the newspaper when it's out, a PDF to locate it. But this young man that's coming in on the murder case, been part of our system a long time, and unlike Mr. Alvin's case back in 1918, nowadays there's so much due process, there's so much making sure the parents approve, the child approves of what the informal adjustment is going to be. You can't afford to take every case to court, and so a lot is done informally with treatment programs, family therapy, community service work, checking on kids at school, bringing them in for weekly reports. There's a lot of work done like that. Well, this boy had had it all. He had had numerous referrals, had a weapons charge 2 years ago, and was committed to one of these, not reformatories, but a group home. So he had spent about a year in a group home on a previous weapons charge. And he had been out for some time, but still in their custody. They usually keep custody for 6 months. When, along with a relative who was working a drug deal, this kid decided to rob the guy that was showing up with the money to buy a whole lot of Xanax. So, wanted to rob the guy and had a pistol with him and allegedly shot him 6 times in the stomach. Well, being almost 17 and out of our system, this is one of those cases that's kind of a no-brainer for the juvenile court because we are out of time to provide treatment and services or punishment or containment or anything you want to call it. We're out of time because kids age out at 18 from our service level. So on a murder case, which has a 20 years to life sentence possibility in Missouri, it just doesn't make sense to keep it as a juvenile matter. So he'll be transferred to the adult side of the courts. Which brings me to something that will be interesting on the adult side, and I hope to follow his case because normally I'm so busy I don't follow cases when they roll into the adults. But I kind of really like to see how much the court and the paperwork, and if there's anything that even looks like a mitigation report on this guy's life, because no father in prison for a long time, father's deceased, there's lots of history of abuse, neglect in the family, not making excuses for allegedly shooting somebody in the belly 6 times, but all of these are mitigating factors that in some courts, mitigation reports really help and really come into play so the courts can look and see exactly what was going on. The chapter covers a lot on, or at least introduces you to restorative justice, which is really important, the workings with victims. And the fragility of victims is something that needs to be considered, which is something I think most people missed in our discussion or in my module when I threw in the information on our prosecutor here in town. his relationship with the victim in a big property case and became a romantic relationship and all that. Just wanted to, don't throw in my perspective at this stage of the class too much, but as someone who's worked a lot in victims' rights, wrote a lot of victims grants, sponsored a lot of restorative justice programs to get victims advocates working out of our office. So it's not just the juvenile officer or the police trying to inform the victim of a case. Victims are off limits. I've always considered them a protected class because as I worked with them, it was very obvious they're in a very fragile emotional state and very easily preyed upon, very easily told wrong information, or will listen to anything you have to say, whether it makes sense or not. They're looking for something to grasp onto, to hang on to. A lot of times you have to repeat basic information to victims over and over because of the trauma they've been through. Their brain's not collating or filing away the information about when court is, what's going on, what's the possible sentences, all the stuff we can just basically reel out of our mouth after all these years in this field. So I was a little discouraged when this prosecutor formed a relationship like that with a victim in the middle of a case that he was working. Yes, he did recuse himself down the line, but victims, clients, my first job as a juvenile officer in the circuit I started, I came in because the chief juvenile officer was fired for having relationships with female probationers. I took over his position. It was a very eerie feeling knowing everybody in the community knew that story, knew what he did, and here I was, the guy that replaced him. And it was a tough experience for the years I spent in that county, 2.5 years at that particular desk. And I'm just saying I was disappointed, and I brought that up to lay out for you as discreetly as I could kind of an ethical issue with how that progressed. I didn't see that in the discussions brought up too much, but just want to lay that out there as someone who works in the field that there's some very fragile emotional states, and you have to be aware of that when you're working with clients. I think that's about it for this week. I've got a light week. We're finished with our grand openings here at the courthouse. I plan to get back on reading some of my material. I try to spend about 2 hours a day reading information on my field. I brought some of the books in. This week, I'll be looking at a new book called The Future of Juvenile Justice, and it's by Tamar Burkhead and Solange Mathone, which is a international juvenile justice specialist, and it's about the future of juvenile courts internationally and how they're working now and what's going to happen to them in the years to come because of basically brain science and the due process that's now required deeper in the system working with juvenile defendants, which is probably not the place we need to get into that now. The next book I hope to get through this week also is a book by a neurologist called The Teenage Brain. Boy, that's something to explore, isn't it? But a neuroscientist's survival guide to raising adolescents and young adults. And this book will get into the neuroscience of what teenagers like to do, basically use tobacco, drugs, pot. They have a lot of stress. They have a lot of sports concussions, all of the issues on the brain that affect basically my clientele. So that's the second one on the list. Of course, I always keep a book going by Michel Foucault. the philosopher, writer of education in the mid 1960s, basically 50s to 1970, maybe 1980. But this is a lecture series at the College of France, and it's called Society Must Be Defended. And it is a lot about the purpose and the obligation of governments with the clients, and the micropolitics involved in governmentality is what he calls it. So that's my big three. I'm also going to look, I have on my Kindle a book that your fellow student Joe Skinner recommended, Starfish and the Spider, which I've heard of before but haven't picked up. So I threw it on the Kindle so I can read that one too this week. So that's kind of sketches out my week. Hopefully the murder case we're going to work this week, working it in this new courthouse, I have various exits, entrances, extra security. It should be a little easier than in some of the other courthouses I've worked those big high-profile cases in. So I'm hoping to be able to move through quite smoothly, move the victims' families, the audience that'll be here, the media, and the defendant himself in and out of the building without any trouble. They will be unfamiliar with the circumstances here. This is a different facility, so I'm hoping to take advantage of people not being used to our courtroom and showing them in one door, out the other. They're not quite aware where they're at, and I'll be able to get this case through without any of the big issues that you have usually before and after a court case with a dead victim. So that's my week. Good luck with the material. I think it's a very well-written chapter this week, and looking forward to what you think about it.